This paper that we have it was originally published in 2017, and then 2018, and then 2021. But if you ever looked at an old paper from a corporate organization like ours, like an old PDF,
times. Yeah,
like it's since I've looked at this platform as a product paper so much, I think I basically am like the Indiana Jones of this one paper, like I haven't found. Because, since it was written, we've been through a couple of owners. I haven't found the original Google Docs. I don't know if you were here at the time, but at Pivotal, we started off with Google Docs. Then we were at VMware, and they were Office. And now we're at Broadcom, they're Google Docs. So we've made a full circle. Anyways, right. I think there's 4 versions of it. And I found the 4th one today that has the original author was Colin Humphreys and Joe Fitzgerald. And this one, I don't remember the name because I just saw it. It's a new name that I haven't seen before. So this is like some archaeological find that's pretty amazing.
Well, you just have to take all the credit then. That's the way that works.
Yeah, well, sure. I'm gonna write a paper on it and get a poster at a conference. So in one of the things now that I think about it that's not mentioned in there, and maybe it's because it was this time, is the phrase team topologies is never used in this paper. Which is kind of remarkable because I forget the exact publication date of team topologies, but it's sometime around the mid-2010s, not the mid-2000s. That's when we were figuring out what Scrum was. Yeah. But I have a confession to make here to you, Tony, and the thousands of people who watch this. I've never actually read the team topologies book. I feel like I have read about it so many times, and I've seen presentations in persons about it, so I probably should get around to reading it. I think there's a new edition coming out too, so it's that's why I've waited this long. I don't read airport business books about software methodology until the 2nd edition. That's my policy.
I don't read any of them. I listen to most of them, but I have a confession
fair
as
enough.
well. So for making confessions,
yes.
I've never read that cover to cover either. Lots of excerpts and seen lots of presentations where people have taken snippets out, and but I'm guilty. Guilty as charged.
Well, so with that accreditation for both of us, now did you get a chance when you were a practitioner to put some of these ideas into practice, or put them up on a whiteboard? Like, and then the people you work with nowadays, do they speak of team topologies and your different? Like I said, I haven't read it. No, you got teams going horizontal and vertical and things like that. Or maybe I'm thinking T-shaped and I-shaped people. But what's been your observation of this team topology thing over the years?
Yeah. So when I did it, like most things that I did, I sort of was accidentally doing the right thing. And again, I think again, I always go back to that happening because we were very customer centric and user centric. And when you do that, turns out you tend to do good things. So we definitely kind of accidentally fell into that. And when I am talking to customers, I do see this happening a lot, like the whole Conway's Law thing. And I think the place where you see this happen or be most apparent is when you have these review boards or when you go to do a change. It's like all of the parties that are involved, right? You have the networking people and the infrastructure people and the security people and the compliance people and the developers and the platform team. And so I think, yes, that being said, the teams are there, but I don't think the topologies are there in place at most customers. And I think that's the key difference is a lot of them are sort of around these functional things they do and not as we talked about in the last episode, they're not formed in a way that is trying to solve, a throughput of a complex system, for example, like this overarching goal.
Right. And so when you say topology, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is when most people talk about org structures and teams, they think of the teams themselves and not the interactions of those teams, which not to get too academic, also I had a comp sci major, so if I get too far into the academic weeds, just back me out of there. But there's a lot of graph theory and complex system theory and mathematical things that talks about the throughput of complex systems and how the thing that causes the most bottlenecks is sort of the interactions between the things, not the things themselves. And so if you think of a team and a topology, it's more around the interaction models of these teams and how they kind of work together. And so there's a lot of notions of self-service and autonomy and APIs in the IT world that is used to sort of represent those the preferred interaction models.
I mean, this brings up questions I always have, like how, like when we talk about like platform engineering or like whatever kind of topology you want, all these things, like how much in practice do you find these things versus, for example, you want to product manage the platform, or you want to have a designer, or all the I'm just rattling off a bunch of stuff, but like it does. I don't know if there's a what's the bias. One of my favorite biases is you only see what's in front of you or whatever. Yeah. And the selection bias. There's some better thing for it, but it does seem like maybe I'm only talking frequently with organizations who don't have these things in place. But it's hard to find a place that's like I don't know. Here's an exemplar of like we do platform engineering. And it seems to like satisfy all the things. It just seems like more traditional infrastructure teams are running a platform, which maybe is fine.
I think I'm a firm believer that when you look at most of these issues, they can all be distilled into a few core concepts. And I think we went through this with Agile as well and sort of lean thinking. So I think, a lot of religions and different methodologies and sort of certification things, kind of crop up. And so I think what we see is a lot of organizations that sort of go after some of that. And they're like, hey, we're going to do platform engineering because like that's going to solve all of this. And so I think what we do is we get people that either buy platforms or they kind of stand up teams, but sort of losing focus of like what the end goal is and sort of the day-to-day things that have to happen to really enable it. Like there's no silver bullet. And so I think with a lot of companies, what we see is this sort of end result of kind of going after a recipe or a silver bullet as opposed to like really buying into sort of the concepts of what makes that what it is and what makes it successful.
So this reminds me, speaking of books that I'm trying to have read, there's this new book called what is it? The Octopus Organization, which is a great name. Anytime you can talk about octopuses or squids.
I got to add that to my list of books that I will try to read.
and it's I remember giving some feedback on chapters of this here and there, but it's a book that goes over. It's organized in the anti-pattern way, right? So it's like here's anti-patterns, and then of course the part of an anti-pattern that you want is the pro pattern. I don't know, the okay pattern. But there's one pattern I was reading which it reminded me of that I was thinking it would be fun to talk to you about. And I think it relates to the platform stuff. We'll figure it out. But it's going over, as you were saying, oftentimes you introduce a strategy or a new idea, and you kind of like chase after it, and it just kind of fizzles out. And one of the reasons that this happens, and also one of the reasons why there's kind of vacuous, jargon-filled talk about something, is you don't really spend enough time talking about like why you're doing something.
Yes.
And at first, I was reading this chapter, and it brought up that guy who had the book about why, which I don't know. I don't really like it's Simon Sinek. I'm sure he's a fine person, but I don't like his theory of why. Like, and I'm gonna go over why. And I was getting all like ready to be upset and scribble some notes in the margin. But then I realized, like, usually when I think about why, it's kind of like from a brand perspective, like, having customers understand what you're doing and things like that. And this is why I don't like the why thing, is like, I think like that's just brand and marketing, right? Like you can like, there can be a coincidence of like, this is your actual identity in the way that you think. And then it happens to be you make a lot of money off of that, but usually not, right?
Yes. Yes.
let alone for like tens of thousands of people in an organization. But and this gets us back to the platform stuff. As I was turning the page, like more of, and I'll have to talk with Jana Werner, one of the authors, when I have an interview with her later this week. But I think more of what they're talking about is internally facing. Knowing these whys is good for not only employee morale, but like strategic execution. And further, I almost, now that I'm listening to myself, I think they fell into the why trap. But like further, it helps you get to exactly what you're saying is not why were we doing this because we're part of humanity and our lives, but what were we trying to accomplish here?
Yes.
Right. Like, and so it's the why of like, not only what were our goals, but like, how were we going to achieve it and what we were going to do? And that feels like something that, especially when it comes to like, if you're introducing like platform engineering, it's easy to fall into that why trap and get mixed up a kind of like, for lack of a better phrase, highfalutin idea of what why is with just a like, we just wanted to ship software faster.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a question, or you want me to kind of extrapolate?
no. I mean, so what I'm interested in hearing about is like, I don't, how do you express like, this is why we're doing this and the goals that we have, and kind of keep that keep that in effect year after year, so you don't sort of like forget it and go chase other things.
Yeah. So I think, first off, this is this is something that's kind of near and dear to me. And I remember working when I was on the other side, on the customer side, like one of the things I would hear from, folks on my team is this disconnect between the work that they were doing and sort of the importance of the business, right? So if you, so for us being a home improvement retailer, there's so much excitement internally, and then, from a marketing and advertising perspective that goes into the things that, as a business you're doing for your customers, right? And I think on the internal, right, on the sausage making behind the scenes side, like all that glamour doesn't exist. And I think like the really successful companies do a really good job of showing clearly the impact that IT and technology has
Right.
on helping the business accomplish their goals. And so I think when that's not there and it's not present, it's very easy for those behind the scenes to kind of start to kind of fall into that trap of local optimization. So, how do I handle my tickets better? How do I keep my system up and right and running? So I think like, and that's just not as glamorous and fun. And so I think it's not as inspirational. So I think the key thing is trying to find that bridge between what the business is setting out to achieve and the impact and the importance that technology and IT plays in enabling that.
Yeah, I like that. That compresses my whole rambling book review down into something, which is I like this notion of one of the ways you slide into local optimization is you're disconnected from the overall system, and then just tell me if this is not how you would think about it. But I think of local optimization you kind of said it, is like, I am going to do really good at my job, irrespective of how it hurts or benefits the rest of the organization. Of course, you would like it to benefit it, but like you don't really. Well, let me try another crack at it. I'm going to do my job as good as possible, and the feedback loop does not include how the rest of the organization is doing.
I was just about to say, yes, absolutely. That's really the key thing. And I think that's, like, again, like I'm a firm believer, and I think the math is out there, all of the stuff is out there that indicates that delivering software for the business is definitely can be modeled as a complex system. And when you do that, it's all about the constraints in that system and how in order to maximize the overall flow, you have to minimize those constraints. But to your point, when you don't see how your little node fits into the whole complex system, then you just begin to locally optimize the inputs and outputs of your node without seeing the impacts it has on the full flow of the system. So to your point, you're absolutely right. And the way that I see this take place most often in a company, the most sort of tangible real world example is some sort of infrastructure group that's operating on tickets. And so like they tend to be undermanned or understaffed. There's a huge flow of work. And the way that they handle that is through tickets. And like that becomes the best way for them to manage sort of their node. And you'll see a lot of metrics on like the tickets that were closed and the tickets that were resolved. And and the mature teams, right, in air quotes, would be the ones that, oh, we automatically close tickets, right? And so and in doing so, like I think that's a, for them, that's a way for that team to be sane and manage the work-life balance and the load and do all of that. But again, it's sort of losing sight of the forest from the trees with the rest of the system and the flow and the organization and the impact that has on everything else. And it is a rippling and a domino effect. Again, like in a complex system, the overall flow is only as good as the worst constraint. And so like if that team is like a huge bottleneck for that reason, like it's going to have a huge impact on the overall system.
And so to jump into the middle of things, let's say you've been doing, you've been following the practices. You've got all the books. I don't know if you like to dog your things on the top or the bottom, of use those little colorful Post-it notes, whatever you like doing. And let's say it's like you're a year and a half into it. Like how are you making sure that this team is not like locally optimizing things? How do you like maintain the connection?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways. So I think, then you kind of get into maturity models, right? That's one example of how to kind of capture some of this. So I think the two biggest ways is that, there is some sort of metrics model. DORA is very commonly, used as one. And I think when Forrest Grin went to Microsoft, they kind of sort of did, phase two of that with like the space stuff. So there are some maturity models around from that perspective. But I think the other one is rooted in sort of the whole Toyota lean thinking. Like it's more of the value stream map, and we talk about golden paths and path to production and things like that. So I think the first step is really to look at the end-to-end process of like how you go from idea to code to production and operations and what that looks like. And you need to sort of start modeling out, where the handoffs occur, where the wait times are occurring, because those become the constraints in the system. And thinking about it, what's interesting, I haven't read that book, Octopus, whatever, but you're mentioning the anti-patterns. And again, this is where I think and I'm not, accusing the author of this, but again, I think everyone comes up with a new way of saying the old things. Right?
Sure.
So like if you're targeting anti-patterns, really what you're doing is you're sort of saying, hey, like, here are the top 3 to 5 constraints in the system that we see, right? And then by counteracting those, you're going to optimize the overall flow. So I mean, it's just a new way of saying sort of the same thing, which is you have to remove the bottlenecks and the constraints to like optimize flow and throughput. So so I think I think you have to model what that overall system looks like. And you get into the topologies and the interactions, and then that will enable you to sort of identify where your bottlenecks are and where to focus your efforts on improving things.
And so I assume, I mean, it's not only mapping that process, but do you have like a big monitor that always has it up in front of everyone's faces? Like maybe just like knowing that it exists and visiting it, I always forget this word. I mean, facile is one way of putting it, but to be reductionist, I think that's the way you're supposed to use that word. I'm always trying to use fancy pants words, but like, maybe a lot of how you prevent local optimization is taking what you were just saying is knowledge of the end-to-end process and just like reminding people twice a week that it exists, right?
Yeah.
And showing them their role in it versus not doing that.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of other, sort of theories and models for doing that. And again, I think this was sort of the impetus around like laddered KPIs, for example, that a lot of companies do, or OGSMs, right? So
yes,
and again, like I think I think those things tend to break down a little bit because of the overhead and the labor it takes in kind of doing that connective tissue between OGSMs and KPIs, for example. But let's assume that there's some good way of doing that. I think, again, when you're looking at information radiators and things of that type, I think what would be super useful, again, is I think everyone is aware of like what the top end business goals are. I think to the point we were making earlier is that when you start to take that and break it down into the things that various groups need to do to support that initiative, that whether that's laddered, KPIs or taking the OGSMs and converting them to KPIs or what have you. I think that's the part that would be really super useful as a team on our side. It would be, hey, like here's the thing that we are optimizing for, not locally. It aggregates several things of the system. And then here's the impact that it has on this broader business goal. And so as we see parts of our, and it goes back to the thing from last week, as we make progress on the things that we're working on that we thought were going to move the needle in this bigger thing, like how is that working? And then in theory, you would see that needle improving as you kind of accomplish the things that you're working, at your sort of more local level.
So tell me more. Like in my head, there's two things we're talking about here. I mean, at least two things. And one of them is, you name checked some of the cool metric systems. Is whatever you want. I'll call them metrics, but like usually a numeric representation of what is happening or what has recently happened. I guess you could have a representation. I just said it of what's happening, a gauge, right?
Yeah.
And but then there's another thing that isn't exactly a metric, and that's sort of like feedback, I guess.
Yes.
Like knowing. There's some type of metric. There's several types of metrics that will tell you how things are going, but then there's also part of how things are going that isn't in the metrics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like what are those things? Do those things exist for platforms, and what do you do with them if they do?
I mean, I think they do. So I think, again, I think most companies have some notion of a feedback loop for, employees, right? And we see this a lot with, surveys around like, what do you think of your leadership team? And what do you think of, how aligned are you with the business goals and, all those things. One of the things I was really proud of where I came from was the notion of sort of piggybacking onto that topics that were very specific to like DORA and SPACE. And so we would look at things like, hey, as a developer, how is the cognitive load, right? Like how, and so there's a lot of non-quantitative things that go into, to your point, this feedback loop that goes beyond the metrics. And so as a developer, you have to talk about, things. This is very useful, obviously, when it's hard to measure things. Before we had all this AI stuff, for example, the amount of time that people would spend in meetings, that would be something very useful to get. But again, I think it's about the sort of feelings and sentiment of the people doing the work. And again, it could just be as simple as, are you aware of the business direction? How inspired are you to do it? Like how important or how motivated are you by, knowing those types of things? So my recommendation would be, for any platform team or shared services team, find out where in your company that notion of a feedback loop on an annual basis or however it is, and then see about how you can piggyback onto that and add things that are very specific to the job functions and roles of like engineering and infrastructure and development.
And then those questions just go down to engineers when they're asked, or like
So well, when we did it, that was that's where I came from. So of course I was my selfishly it was more engineering focused, but like we quickly got input from UX and product people like no, like we have a bunch of questions that have to do with our job titles and roles as well that we want to have included. So it did get expanded, and testing, for example. So I think yes. So I think there's this notion of metrics that we can get from pipelines and CI/CD and GitHub and Rally, whatever tools you're using, right? There's a lot of metrics, but I think the human input and the feedback loops of the subjective stuff is also very important. And, from everyone involved in the process, you should be eliciting that feedback.
So back to metrics. I'm not a practitioner, but I read all these metric things. And one of the things that like, kind of like, I don't know, hangs out in my head about them is they're often, some of the metrics overviews are very, I don't know what the word is, disclaimatory. They're almost like, these are some ideas we have that are good for metrics, but hey, you should see what works for you, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the space one is a little bit like this, and I think, I spent a lot of time reading it a couple of years ago, and I think it's a little misunderstood in that they're trying to present, here are all is the wrong word. Here's a bunch of possible metrics you would use to measure developer-y stuff, and some of them are not great. Right? Like,
Yeah.
like infamously, I think it talks about lines of code in there, and it's actually like, this is not great, but they're trying to be comprehensive. So, and whatever. I'm not picking on them, but it is, when you are like looking at whether it's DORA or other schools of metrics, like, how slippery do they seem as far as like, you could just take this and implement it? Like, or do you have to do a lot of work to like gently with a velvet glove forklift it into your organization?
I think it's the latter. So I think for me, I thought it would be a very quick, like, yeah, this is super easy. I read this book. We know what the metrics are. We can do all this. And then as soon as you start talking to people, especially leaders, the people that are impacted, all sorts of like human psychological things come up, and around the biggest one was performance management, which I think is to the point that you're kind of making. And I could be wrong, but I would suspect that space was sort of in response to the weaponization or sort of the misuse of DORA, right? So I think everyone took DORA as sort of like, here's the religion, like we're going to do this, and like that's going to solve everything. And I think much of what space was in response to be like, well, hold on, that's not what we intended. Like, you shouldn't be using this, to do X, Y, and Z. And so I think like what we did is that we said, okay, hold on a second. Certain metrics make sense for app teams, right? For them to look at only themselves internally. Some metrics should be used by the executive leadership team to kind of get an overall feeling of how things are going. And so there's a lot of things that have to go into that around like anonymizing to some degree, and at what level you anonymize. But that's like a whole other topic, and it's very complicated. But to your point, I thought it would be really quick. It took around 2 years. And so like there's probably better formulas for doing it now, and gotchas that you could avoid if I were to do it all over again. But yes, it does take some time, and there's a human element to it, and it has to be done correctly.
So now in your professional life, maybe in your personal life you do this too, but at least during the working hours. I mean, you talk to other organizations who are trying to do this, and so and especially since you work at a vendor, you probably see metrics of all types scurrying around, right? Because people on both sides of the buy and the sell side are always trying to use the numbers to do an accounting for what they think should happen, right? Yeah. Lots of numbers going back and forth. And like, what's your sense for like over the past couple of years, I don't know, anonymized or an aggregate, like what kind of metrics are people using, and are they happy with them? Like, what's it look? Does everyone just use the 4 DORA metrics, or like how do they account for platform stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think the DORA metrics are the most important ones. And I think part of the reason is because some of them are also low hanging fruit. So I think for me personally,
like possible to measure.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, again, when I'm consulting with companies about this, I think sort of the low hanging fruit obviously is the frequency of changes. And again, it's because most companies have some form of change control process. And so like there's something we can refer to figure out how that's going. I think where we get into trouble with something like that though is when, and I saw this firsthand, is the change process for sort of lower level systems like infrastructure, physical servers, and things like that would be a much slower pace than someone who's just writing code and operating in like in a SaaS environment. And so and I think it gets into the point of like, hey, like this is great, but don't compare this team to that team or that org to that org. So that's one example. But yeah, so I think frequency of changes is a really good one. Where I see most teams struggling is around, and it's gotten better with reliability engineering principles and sort of methodologies, but is around mean time to recovery, more around outages, the impacts of those outages, and then, the number of failed changes and things like that. That's where I see the data is not as available. But more importantly is when you start to talk to them about what it would take to get that data, like that opens up a whole bunch of work that some people were aware of and just knew that mountain was like really too big to climb with the resources they've been allocated. Or it tends to be like, oh my gosh, I never knew like that it would take this much energy to get that, because it's kind of a hard thing to do. And so I think it's also a level of maturity that a lot of companies are not at.
So what what to dive into that? What makes it hard to measure something like MTTR?
Yeah, so I think it's around tooling and sort of the metrics of the systems, the various platforms that they're on, the environments that they exist in. There's we talked about shadow IT a little bit, right? So there could be some system that's a part of the overall system sitting under someone's desk or in this lost, forgotten place, right? And so I think it's around just having a lack of standardization, right, for all of the existing things. And just it's the tooling and the metrics emitting just isn't there for a lot of these applications, especially the brownfield applications or the older ones. So I think, and they're just not set up for it. It's not something that they've cared about as much in the past. Like there's lots of data around incidents, but then if you look at the meta of the metadata around those incidents, that tends to be what's missing.
So is it that you can't, if you've got the literal or proverbial like data center under a desk situation, is like there's a failure, but you don't really know how to trace it down and find out when it started or when it ended. Like you kind of only have like the ultimate end effect of when it ends, because you can do whatever it is your business is doing.
Yeah, I think most of it has to do with sort of a lack of an overall API-based process for accurately detecting when things happen, when you started working on the fix, when the fix went into play.
Right.
So I think it's more around the accurate measurement of
It's like the start time.
Yeah, like typically what we'll see. I'll use this as an example, like ServiceNow, for example. When you look at incident management for a lot of companies, it's a very manual process. You're in a war room, like, hey, there's an outage. We're all kind of, huddling around trying to figure this out. Someone puts a fix in, but maybe the ticket doesn't get closed until 3 days later, for example, right? So I think it's,
yeah.
These are some of the challenges.
I see. So it sounds like it's it could even be about the end time when things are fixed, but determining the start time can be very difficult, because there's a difference between like when the problem started and when someone noticed the problem started and started doing something about it. And then also, to your point, there's like, did anyone write down when it started, and did we keep that piece of paper? Or did someone come in and erase the whiteboard because they had a meeting about, the new brand colors for fall that they want to use? And so all of that accounting can get a little absurd after, unless it's well instrumented, it gets absurd. I mean, it reminds me, as a frequent traveler, like, there's always a lot of confusion in my head about like when boarding is versus 20 minutes ago when they said the gate is about to close, right? Yeah. Like there's all kind of shenanigans going on about like when planes get here and when they leave and all of that stuff, which generally it's all fine, but when it goes wrong, it's a little crazy.
Yeah, it takes me back to, and this is one of the things that gets mentioned. I forget what the law of this is, right? But the once you start caring about metrics, right, and then that changes, sort of the impacts and the validity of those metrics, right? And so because you get people that kind of game the system, and we see this with flights, right? It's like, oh, your scheduled arrival or departure time, right? And it's like, how often you're like, oh, we're glad to announce that we're going to arrive 18 minutes early, and it's like, yeah, it's because you baked in the in the stuff ahead of time. So so that's like a whole other thing when it comes to metrics, and again, there's how do you battle that and sort of keep yourself as inoculated to that as possible.
So let's stick with the metric thing. I think there's plenty more to say today on that. Like, well, we'll see. That's my theory, at least. Like, so we got the. Let's see if I remember them. We got our 4 DORA metrics, which is like, I get all persnickety about lead time versus cycle time, but it's like time to when you've got an idea of something you want to do, and like now someone's using it, and one of them is somewhere in there, and then you have your is it your error rate that you have, like basically how often when you release something an error happens, and I'm totally forgetting the other two. Maybe what I should do is just look up what the metrics are.
Yeah. So there's frequency of change, right?
Yeah.
Then I think the one you were talking about, like cycle time or lead time, that's sort of the lead time or cycle time for a change. And then there is one about change failure rate, I think. And then the other one was the MTTR. I think those were the main 4. And then they came up with a 5th one. I can't remember what the unofficial 5th one was. Maybe that had something to do around availability or something. I can't remember that one. But what does Google say? What does Google say?
Here we go. I went to the DORA.dev guides. And I think what they are, if I'm pulling it apart, is change lead time. That's the one I was stumbling to, and deployment frequency, right? Which I guess that could be separate from change lead time, right? This is more of a
yes,
yeah, and then change fail percentage, which I guess I was taking error rate. I think that's an SRE metric.
Yeah, that's an SRE thing. Yep.
Right, and then you have failed deployment recovery time. So, which that's an interesting wording to make it distinct from just MTTR. I guess it's saying when you screwed something up, how quickly do you recover from it? Because it implies a deployment happened, not just like mysteriously something occurred.
Yeah. And I think, again, when I was involved with that, and the wording on that has changed, I think I remember there being a lot of confusion about failed change rate, because a lot of people thought that meant I tried to push something into production and that didn't go the way we thought. And so we had to roll it back. And I think what they're trying to say is, which is the right way to look at it, and it is that you put something in the production, or you tried to, it doesn't matter like what the time is after that. If that thing has had a negative impact for whatever reason, like the amount of time it takes to recognize that, correct that, whether it's immediately 5 seconds or whether it's 2 days or 5 weeks or whatever. So,
so okay, so we got those 4.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of alluded to some. I'm interested in other metrics that you've encountered or used that are helpful. And we talked about some of the people-based ones, or as people would say, the soft ones, which I think maybe they're soft because people are soft if you poke at them, unlike computers. But you've got some of the people ones, which are like I'm going to characterize, make a bucket out of a lot of what we said, which is, do you? It's a little too. I'll try the word again, reductionist, to say, are you happy? Right? Because that's ultimately like kind of a sentiment thing. But it's, do you think? Do you have? Are you confident that you understand why you're helping the business? Right? Like, do you have a notion of how you fit into things to do? There, and of course, you could measure other stuff, but that's an interesting way of doing it. So. Like what are other metrics that you find people tracking beyond those 4?
I'll be honest. Like, I think this is something. I mean, most of the companies, by far, the vast majority of companies I'm working with, are not doing much of this. Like, I think frequency of changes, and I think there's some attempt at the DORA things. I think on the space side, that's where I don't see nearly as many companies engaged, but. I would say, but if you look at sort of the more HR focused ones, I think it is around like satisfaction and well-being. I think there is some stuff around like, how do you feel? I do think there are some things around like your confidence, whether that's like in the leadership or the direction, or like, how inspired or motivated sort of you are. I do think what's missing though is a lot of stuff around cognitive load. Like how hard, or how often are you interrupted? Like, that's one that I think is really important that we don't talk about, and only because I don't think there's not a way to kind of get there from the general things that we are surveying our employees about when that's more HR focused. And so if you look at something that's a little bit more job function focused, I think that's where that would come up.
Yeah.
And then when you get into like the job or role specific things, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think, product may care about, or, UX may care about, or engineering may care about. But I think generally speaking, I think cognitive load, sort of confidence or motivation, and then I think sort of satisfaction and well-being. How often, how likely are you to recommend to a friend or colleague that they work here, for example, is a really good question.
Right, your NPS or your
Yes.
ENPS.
Yes,
I
right.
think that with the little lowercase e to be
Yep.
super cool. Wait, so on, I guess in IT in general, but also of course like the platform team to measure interruptions. Like, can you like measure the amount of meetings they have? And is that correlated anyway? That's obviously not going to measure every interruption because people can come up to you virtually or in person, but that seems like it could be something, or is it not?
Yeah. So here was my take on that. So I think when I first started out with this, in my experience, at first I thought it would be really simple. I would like, hey, we are, my group is in charge of all these systems and tools that everyone's using. They all have metrics and logs. And then I think that was where I started. It was to say, hey, we're going to use all this. And then what I quickly found was that the organization, the complex system delivering software is not as federated and same as I would envision. And so then there's so much complexity that goes into the difference of like, are you customer facing? Are you brownfield? Are you greenfield? And so like, there's just too many demographics of differences, whether it be, where things are running, who they're for, how old they are. And so what I found was that actually the actual metrics are good for kind of looking at specific demographics of products and sort of engineering groups. But what was most useful and the easiest lift is to sort of normalize those things into a survey based thing, because the surveys, one is that it would normalize all of the differences between the groups.
Right. They do the not transformation, the conversion.
Yes,
Like,
right. Yeah. Yeah. So instead of me trying to go through all these logs and create all these complex models, and you're looking at trying to compare this to that and compensate for that, like it was just much easier to say that's all useful and sort of isolated. Maybe, when we're trying to optimize a bottleneck, like let's look at that and help sort of solve that for a particular group. But if I'm a leader or a team trying to get a sense of like how my organization is doing as a whole and what the key problems are, I think survey based is way better because it does normalize all of the differences between those technical and system and process things, that it just gives you a common ground to kind of look at everyone on the same level.
yeah, I like that. It's following like the I'm going to forget what kind of system programming principle this is, but like instead of you, Tony, going to get the data and doing something with it, you're like delegating it to other people to gather it for you and then send it to you. Which, when I put it like that, it sounds like a managerial thing. Now you're doing the fence painting thing that Tom Sawyer was good at. But it's more of I don't know how you're going to determine these values, so you are the only ones who can determine them.
Correct.
Please do that instead of you trying to like find the metrics and even to use the word again, transform them, right? Like
Yep.
instead you need the groups to do it. And like how, I mean, do you worry about that being just like more work? Like, how do you make sure that's not too much work for them?
Yeah, I mean that comes up, and I think it's not a whole lot of work because again, I think the way that the questions are worded and the frequency of the survey, and there's a lot of different theories about this as well. Like I know some companies like Microsoft, for example, I don't know if they're still doing this, but I know they used to, is that they would do regular surveys of a sampled set, right? And then some companies
All
are
right.
like, no, like everyone's going to take the survey and they're going to do it once a year or twice a year or what have you. So there's a couple different models, but in terms of frequency, like that's one thing. But I think the other thing is you obviously want to set some constraints about how long it takes. And that's why I actually think the survey is a really good way of doing it, is because you're asking things in a way of like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how productive do you feel, right? Like how productive are you based on like how productive you feel you could be, right? Like you're basically like how far under your potential are you performing? Like if
Right, right,
and
right.
so I think like things like that is where you can say like, oh wow, that doesn't take long for them to answer, right? And at the same time, it allows them to model the complex system and sort of distill it to a quick thing. Like they don't have to think about all the pieces. They just know that like generally speaking, I'm very frustrated, and it could be because of a ticket system or how long it takes to get a dev environment. But all of that will get encapsulated into how frustrated they are with their productivity, for example. And so like it's a really good way to kind of get to the basis of what you're going after without having to draw things out and get into all the details.
So like what, I mean, to force an absurd metric on something, like what percent of the kind of like management of your platform stuff do you think is the things we've just been talking about? Like, are you meeting your potential? What is the meeting your potential? That sounds like, we're talking to people in finishing school, but like the sort of managing the people and how they're doing their work and the system of people versus like the system of the computers and stuff.
Yeah, so I think this is something that does get covered in team topologies, and I forget what they break that down into. It's the interaction models, and I think the two that I think I recall is we have that as a service kind of thing, or like platform as a service, right? Which is where that's kind of like where you want to be. That's where you understand the norms, the boundaries, the constraints. You've automated things. There's APIs. And then there's this other interaction model, which is like the collaboration part, right? That's the overhead. So like that's when you have to get a lot of people working together, like that's what takes time. And so like the notion is that when you're out to solve a problem, you want to collaborate, but then you eventually want to take that collaboration and distill it into something repeatable, self-service, automatic, API driven. And then there's a third one, which if I remember correctly, again, you might want to Google this while I'm thinking about, there was something around enablement, which is where you would say, this would be like the people helping the teams take advantage of it, or you'd be advocating for it or promoting it. Let me see there's one more. That the other one was this, the one that I didn't get into as often, but I was aware of some examples. Which was like those deep, what do they call them? Like the very technical niche things that would cut across the org. And so for us at Home Depot, for example, I know pricing engine, right? Like, the analytics and algorithms around like how you price items, like very technical.
Very important.
Yeah, yeah. Like there was a team that did that, and like that was their job, and like that's great. But they did it in a way that the rest of the organization could take advantage of their work without having to know all of that. And so, and that's where and that's really the platform's thing, right? And we've talked about this before. If you have a platform that's API first and, self-service and all of these things, it allows you to take all of these groups that are typically sort of locally optimizing, whether that be the database team or the SRE team or the security team, and it allows them to put the efforts of their work in a place that the entire organization can take advantage of without having to interact with them. And again, like, because if you're looking at the complex system and interaction, the human element of things, the process, the tickets, the collaborating, that is where the bottlenecks occur. That's where the cognitive load is. And so having a platform that all of these groups can take and bake the efforts of their work into so that others take advantage of, like that's sort of the goal, the utopia.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah. I like that idea because it pulls together a lot of things. One of them being, and contradictory is the wrong word, but it pulls together some, let's call them applicable 70% of the time things, right? And one of them being, and that way of framing it is correct, because anytime I find that I'm ultimistic, absolutist, like the original idea gets dismissed. But in general, a 70% of the time that's true in work is anytime you're anytime when you're communicating with people, it's probably burning up a lot of time, right? And I remember this is one of the Amazon Bezos principles or something. I don't know if it's a principle, but as you were just going over, like, and to put it another way, it's often a sign of friction or a bottleneck or like waste in the system.
Yes.
Whereas, like, if the pricing team needs access to some data and they have to go talk to someone, there's a problem. Like that should have been that could have been automated and faster, and then they wouldn't need to talk with someone. But once you got to talk to someone, you got to like arrange a time to talk with them. You've got to see if you understand them. You've got to ask them like clarification things, and then you go on and on and on, right?
Yep.
So like it'd be better 70% of the time to not have to talk to people.
Yep.
And that, that does seem like, that seems like one way of expressing the value of a platform, because it can be hard to explain why this is valuable, but just speeding up things. See, I've even fallen to the speeding up things is not good at all. But like, I don't know, whatever that is, I'll have to think about that some more. That
it is
makes
a
sense.
little counterproductive. Again, because I think when if you were to walk into a meeting and it's like, hey, like, I'm going to make it so that you guys never have to work together or talk to each other. It's like, hold on a second.
Right.
And this goes back to the team topologies thing, right? Like one of the teams is the whole, it's more the very focused app team, for example, the business team that's like focused on
right.
selling more things, right? That's the team that has to be very tight knit and work together and do all that. But in theory, what you want is all of the stuff they need to get their job done. You don't want them to have to talk to anyone or get approvals, right, or do anything. And that goes back to like this notion of like shared services and IT. Like I think, the way I used to model it within us was, you want to make the right thing and the easy thing the same thing. And so I think like you want that team, they are going to go to the path of least resistance and like the shadow IT and all that. So you want there to be guardrails, but you never want those teams to feel like they're ever bumping into them. And like that, and so like you've baked in, the security and the reliability and, the compliance and audit and all of these things. Like you don't want those teams having to worry about YAML or like any of that stuff, right? You want them taking business directives and decomposing that into code and services, writing, testing, and deploying, and putting that as frequently as possible and as safely as possible, right? And it's like, just let them focus on that. And like, that's the key thing.
Yeah. You maybe we'll see if by next time either of you or I remember this, but like this is adding some intellectual seasoning to like anytime I read a book about this stuff. I'm always wrestling with the following duality, I don't know, or dichotomy. It's word exploration episode apparently, but. A lot of the stuff in management lore, I mean, all the way down to like what platform engineering is or whatever enterprise life-changing thing you're doing it's often about making it so that people can try things and experiment to innovate, to like think and not just do command and control stuff. On the other hand, as I mean, maybe I'm mischaracterizing it, but as you were alluding to, most of the time, if you have to think about what you're doing, that's not a great situation, right? Like maybe you want to focus on what your problem is, but if you like know how to deploy the software, that really shouldn't be open to innovation.
Yeah, I'll put it another way. And I think as we kind of wrap up the episode, I think if I were to distill it down into something, right? The platform engineering team is to reduce the cognitive load of their customers, not to control things. And the reason for that is because the people using that platform are trying to do the same thing. So like they are trying to do the same thing for their users. And the only way they can do that is, to your point, like A/B testing, split testing, deploy frequently, get feedback and change. And so like that whole feedback loop for them is the reason why that the platform is needed on our end as well, is to support that. And it's like, and that can only happen when we reduce cognitive load and not control things.
Well, there you go. We've gotten all the way to the why, or a why, one of the whys, which is to say, you know, the why being we have a problem. Here's how we think we're going to fix that problem, and here's what it's going to look like when we fixed it, right?
Yep.
And how you do that loop over and over. So I don't know if that's a why, but that's sort of like, it's more of an existential, what's the point of what we're doing here?
Yes. Yep.
Which I think is a superset of whys. Well, as always, it's been a fun conversation. I think you know, I think maybe I need to go back to being excited about reading these books. We'll see. I'm going to make it through the Octopus Project, which is not, it's the Octopus Organization. That's the name of a band back in my Gen X era in Austin that I liked.
The Phoenix Project and the Octopus Organization. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. They were probably like,
Occupying.
if you have an animal in the name of your thing, it's successful. We'll find out. Well, you know, we streamed on Monday because we're busy tomorrow, but usually we'll be streaming on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern U.S. time, and then 4 p.m. Amsterdam time. And feel free to join us. And you know, hopefully it was enjoyable. And so with that, we'll see everyone. I guess Tuesday in the future, where we all shall hopefully live.
Great. Good to see you, Kote.